New car prices continued to soar during the last quarter of this year, making them more unaffordable than ever. This development is representative for many other goods. With inflation close to double digits, many products are shooting up in value, and the Fed attempts to kill this inflation by raising the interest rates. The whole idea behind this is that credit becomes expensive and saving becomes attractive. This in turn decreases demand and eventually, after some period, decreases prices. At least in theory, we cannot see any of this dynamic in the new car market. In fact, new car buyers are being squeezed as new cars are more unaffordable than ever. Prices continue to increase at a higher pace than income, and monthly payments are shooting up following an increase in rates. And this has huge implications for the market. Buyers at the lower end of the price spectrum are being pushed out of the market, while car manufacturers are focusing on the higher end. So let's see what's all happening in the new car market and if the situation will change anytime soon. Over here we have the development of the new vehicle average transaction price, and this graph pretty much speaks for itself. With an average transaction price of $48,301, prices are at record heights. Now, as you can see, new car prices always trend up as they follow inflation. We also need to keep in mind that new cars are getting bigger and more advanced, hereby pushing prices up. Yet, the increase in the last 2 years deviates from the normal trend and pushed prices to levels that are unaffordable for many. Now, all of this is not a problem as long as income grows at the same pace, but you do not need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that this did not happen. As we can see over here, the median week of income needed to purchase a new light vehicle was 42.6 weeks in July, and this is the highest it has ever been. Historically though, this number has been fairly stable even though that new car prices trended up. Between 2017 and mid-2020, it fluctuated between 32 and 34 weeks. So what is going on here? Well, the recent increase in the indicator is not solely the result of the increase in prices. It's the increase in interest rates that is exacerbating the increase in the indicator. Over here we see in yellow the average monthly car payment and in blue the average APR. APR stands for the annual percentage rate and covers things like the interest rate, but also additional charges. The average monthly payment of course increased with the average transaction price that we saw in the previous graph, but it is also influenced by the interest rate or the APR. And we can see that these shot up from around 4.3% at the beginning of the year to 6% now, and this affects all brands. Over here we can see the APR rate by brand, and this reveals that APRs are increasing approximately with the same rate across the industry. However, it is important to note that the rates are much closer to each other than in 2019 or let's say 2018. Back then, Honda and Subaru had the lowest APRs, suggesting that these brands had the least risky customers, or in other words, customers with a relatively high and stable income. Kia and Nissan customers had the highest APRs, suggesting that those customers had lower credit scores. Fast forwarding to 2022, we can see that the spread of the APRs decreased. Subaru and Honda still have the lowest APRs, but they are much closer to the industry average than before. Likewise, Kia and Nissan's APRs are almost identical to Hyundai's. So what does all of this mean and why does it matter? It means that the group of buyers is more financially homogeneous, or to put it simple, the customers look alike when it comes to their financial situation. They all have finances that are in good shape. In fact, people with lower credit scores are completely pushed out of the market. Have a look at the following graph. Over here we have the share of subprime and deep subprime loans being issued for new vehicles. So basically the share of loans issued to people with a poor credit score. We can see that subprime loans drop to 5% and deep subprime loans to basically 0%. Prices and interest rates are too high for people who do not have a tip-top credit score. Consequently, the share of buyers with an income less than $50,000 dropped below 25% compared to 40% in 2015. Now you would think that this is a concern for car manufacturers. After all, it means that their potential customer base is shrinking. While this is the case, I doubt they are worried. They're fighting for the same customers but also for customers that buy more expensive cars and often even above MSRP. And these cars of course have high margins, meaning that they need to sell less of them compared to the cheaper models. Over here we can see in blue the incentive percentage of the transaction price and in green the price relative to MSRP. And this shows that the pricing power is still with the manufacturers. Prices are still above MSRP. Yet there are some differences between the brands. Hyundai, Land Rover, Honda and Kia show the most price strength in the market as transaction prices are between 5 and 9% above MSRP. Ram, Volvo and for example the smaller Italian brands like Alfa Romeo and Fiat showed the least price strength, selling 1% or more below MSRP in August. We can see that there is a tiny downward development, but it is a bit too optimistic to say that the situation is improving for buyers. So we saw now that increasing transaction prices and increasing interest rates are pushing buyers with a relatively low credit score out of the market. Consequently, car manufacturers are focusing on luxury vehicles and high-income buyers. But how did we get into this situation and when will it end? The past 2 years basically consisted out of a perfect storm for the increase in new vehicle prices. Demand increased a lot following all sorts of relief schemes and supply plummeted following supply chain issues and poor planning. This has been discussed over and over again, so let's have a look at the current situation. Looking at the demand side, we can see that new car sales, or to be more precise, the seasonally adjusted annual rate is way down compared to 2019. Monthly sales hovered around 1.1 million cars since August of last year. But as we all know, this is not because demand is not there. This number is constrained by the supply levels. So let's have a look at supply. Over here we have in red the supply level. And you can see that compared to 2020 and 2019, supply is way below normal levels. And as I mentioned before, this is the result of all sorts of shortages. However, the situation improved slightly compared to 2019, as supply is up by 41%. And this is indeed a large increase, but I feel that the impact of this is overstated in many articles and videos. Inventory is to a large extent focused on the high-end luxury vehicles, as these bring in the highest margins. We also cannot forget that inventories are still 63% below 2019 levels. Even if the current level doubled, we wouldn't be close to the old situation. And I think that this is presented in an excellent way in the day supply graph. The day supply shows the average days it takes to sell a car and is therefore a good indicator of the hotness of the market. Over here we can see that with a bit under 40 days, the day supply improved from last year, but is still miles away from 2019. Again, pricing power remains with the manufacturers, so things look pretty bad if you want to buy a new car. They are still becoming more unaffordable and supply is still really low. Can we expect this to change anytime soon? Nobody really knows, but here's my take on it. Looking at the demand side, things are changing quickly, but only for a few. At the current inflation level, buying power is decreasing at a rapid pace. Now the good news is that with all the federal support schemes, many built a solid cushion during the pandemic. But this cushion is shrinking rapidly, especially for the low-income group. Over here you can see the development of the checkable deposits and currencies by income quantile. And this shows that it is up in every quantile with exception of the lowest one. And relating this back to the car market, this group is not the group that is buying brand new cars right now. However, with the rapid drops in buying power, you might see more and more of these lines turn. And that will of course trickle down to new vehicles. But we're not there yet. Mid to high income earners are relatively unaffected by the inflation up to a certain point, and the closer we get to that point, the larger the impact on new vehicle sales. Yet, as we saw, current demand is still higher than supply, so a decrease in demand does not mean an immediate collapse in the vehicle prices. One thing to keep an eye on though is the price of used cars. Contrary to new vehicle prices, prices for used cars are coming down at a rapid pace. Some segments already lost more than 10% during this year. We will discuss this at length in a different video, but all of this means of course that used cars are becoming more attractive relative to new cars. On top of this comes that the current depreciation curves are steeper than normal, hereby decreasing values of almost all brand new vehicles. So combining the increasing attractiveness of used cars relative to new cars and the decreasing buying power, you could argue that manufacturers will start to notice this sooner or later. However, many of them communicated to artificially limit supply and hereby keep prices high, and this involves some of the large manufacturers. Yet, saying something and actually doing it are two different things. According to Cox Automotive, car manufacturers' plants are currently running at 40 to 65% capacity, and that is not a desirable number. Moreover, previous economic shocks such as the dot-com bubble and the financial crisis showed us that manufacturers tend to ramp up quickly after a major downturn. But let's say that some of them want to return to normal production levels. Could they? A recent report from McKinsey dismantles the current situation and concludes that the shortages are driven by a combination of structural factors that already existed prior to the pandemic, but also by the over-ordering of automotive companies. I shared this with you before, but due to its relevance I chose to include it again. OEMs and Tier 1 suppliers are expected to place orders for enough automotive chips to outfit about 120 million new cars, but annual vehicle sales are forecasted to be about 83 million. And this creates a typical bullwhip effect that only exacerbates the problem. We already discussed this many times on the channel. On top of this comes the predicted shortages for other items such as electric steel. In short, expert consensus seems to be that the automotive industry needs to drastically rethink its approach to supply chain management and that these shortages won't disappear by themselves. So the expectancy is that the chip shortage won't end before 2023 or even 2024. It depends a little bit on the source you look at. Alright, so on the demand and supply side we have forces that could push prices lower. But as I said before, we need to be realistic here. Movements on the demand and supply side do not mean that new cars will suddenly become affordable. But we should be moving to a situation where you can get a new car at MSRP. Now before I end the video I need to mention that this video covered the market for normal cars. There will be a separate video on the exotic car market, so stay tuned for that. And with that we do then arrive at the end of this video. Now if you enjoyed this data-driven way of analyzing car prices, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.